So this is called the HaYehudim. These are words that's taken out of the Megillah. And this is a Maamar that the Rebbe said in 1951. So this is within weeks after he officially became the Rebbe. Because the Frierdiker Rebbe, the previous Rebbe, passed away in 1950. The Rebbe basically was the Rebbe then, but the official acceptance was in 1951. Shvat time, so Shvat Adar, it's 1 month later that this Maamar was said. And it starts off summarizing a Maamar of the same name that the Frierdiker Rebbe said. The Rebbe is talking about a Maamar of his father-in-law. He takes it, he summarizes it, and then he asks a bunch of questions on it. And then goes off, and we get a whole new Maamar out of it. The Maamar that the Frierdiker Rebbe said was in 1927, and that was in Moscow. And one of the things about that is, especially during this socialist, communist, Bolshevik kind of rule, is they didn't like religion. Before that, under the Tsar, they didn't like religion much either. But here, the secret police and everything's at the next level. At that time, 1927, there were a lot of eyes on the Frierdiker Rebbe. The government agents and everything on him, watching him, because he set up a massive underground network. And it was literally to the point of sacrifice. There were a few people who were taken away and never heard from again. Some people were taken away and stuck in the gulag for Siberia for how many years? And this Maamar that was said on Purim, Katan, in Moscow, the Frierdiker Rebbe had warned that there were going to be agents there watching him. He still went ahead and did this gathering. A lot of Hasidim, a lot of people came to listen. They did fundraising for the schools and all that kind of stuff. And actually, a few weeks later, he was arrested. He has a whole miracle. Remember we learned about Yud Tes Kislev, that when the Alter Rebbe was put in prison in Tsarist Russia, and then he was free, a big miracle and all that stuff. So the Frierdiker, the previous Rebbe, has it also. It's Yud Beis Yud Gimel Tammuz. It comes out in summertime. They were going to execute him for treason. The heinous crime of setting up schools for Torah study. It changed to exile, and then it was changed that it was free altogether, but they're like, get out of Russia, we don't want you here anymore. He was a big name target. He was someone who not only is a big leader of the Jewish community, but someone who was openly a leader of the Jewish community. We will do what we must do kind of person. So even though he knew that there were eyes on him, he still went ahead with the Farbrengen. And Maamar that he said, which you'll see a little bit here, very openly speaking about the necessity of Torah study, specifically Torah study for children. Emphasis on that. Which again, when you realize the context of the Frierdiker Rebbe made sure, the Rebbe afterwards, even though they weren't in Russia anymore, they still maintained this whole underground network. Because when you don't have Torah study, you don't have Jewish education, then there's just nothing. They risked their lives to do it. Frierdiker Rebbe, there was not necessarily a guarantee that he was going to get out of this alive. Obviously, the Rebbe has faith, but the Rebbe also knows that God can have any plan for him in his future. Anyways, so the previous Rebbe said the first Maamar. His Maamar was also based on one of the Alter Rebbe. So you have that a lot where successor generation will expand upon something that was said before. This Rebbe said this Maamar, and we'll repeat it, and often repeat and expound upon it. And let's go even deeper to it. That's kind of like the setup of this. So this is right after the Rebbe officially becomes Rebbe, that he's saying a Maamar based on a Maamar of his father-in-law. The Rebbe always referred to his father-in-law as the Rebbe. For him, he was always the Rebbe. So now let's look at the Maamar itself. Some of the main focuses of this Maamar, one has to do with Torah study, specifically Torah study with children, specifically when you have the leader of the generation who is like the Moshe Rabbeinu of the generation. Moses is Moses. There is only ever one Moses, and he was on a level that no one ever can reach that level. But each generation is given their Moses-like figure. The leader doesn't necessarily reach the level of Moses, but he is our Moses of our generation. We would regard the Rebbe in that regard of saying, this is the Moses of the generation, this Jewish leader. It's not just the impact, the worldwide impact that they have, but also someone who specifically raises up the Jewish people. It helps to channel incredible levels of faith. Okay, of course, blessing and all these things, but specifically to strengthen the faith of the Jewish people, to raise up the Jewish people, that gets channeled through the Moses of the generation. So because we're talking about Purim, that figure is going to be Mordechai. This is toward the end of the Megillah where this verse comes in, and it's speaking about once the miracle has happened, how they're setting up the holiday of Purim now. As in, we have the whole story of Purim, and then toward the end, the last kind of chapters, it talks about how they set up all the mitzvahs of Purim, and they sent out the scrolls and the stories to the different communities, and they established Purim to be a holiday for all generations. This verse comes in there. And the Jews accepted upon themselves that's what they had commenced to do, and Mordechai had written to them. Basically, all the Jews accepted that Purim was going to be a holiday. Simple, clear explanation. We know we have a Maamar, so we know it's not just that. The focus is on these first two words of V'kibel HaYehudim. They accepted upon themselves what they had commenced, as in what they had started to do. What is it referring to? So here we see, this is from the Gemara. There's a section of the Gemara, there's a tract that's called Shabbat. The Gemara cites additional homiletic interpretation on the topic of the revelation at Sinai. So it's talking about our Sinai getting the Torah. The Torah says, and Moshe brought forth the people out of the camp to meet God, and they stood at the lowermost part of the mountain. Rabbi Avdimi bar Chama bar Chasa said, the Jewish people actually stood beneath the mountain, and the verse teaches that the Holy and Blessed be He overturned the mountain above the Jews like a tub, and said to them, Kavar Lam Har Kagigis. Said to them, if you accept the Torah, excellent. If not, there will be your burial. Rav Acha Bar Yaakov said, from here there's a substantial caveat to the obligation to fulfill the Torah. The Jewish people can claim that they were coerced into accepting the Torah, and it is therefore not binding. More sages coming in, Rabbah said, even so, they again accepted it willingly in the time of Achashverosh, as it is written, the Jews ordained and took upon them and upon their seed and upon all such as joined themselves unto them. We see over here in the Hebrew it says, Kimu v'kiblu HaYehudim. The Jews ordained what they had already taken upon themselves through coercion at Sinai. Here it goes. What did they accept upon themselves? What do you mean that they took upon themselves what they had started to do? Look at this section in the Gemara where it talks about how at Har Sinai, the Jewish people were standing there, and in a literal or figurative sense, God raised the mountain over them, and he said, accept the Torah, I'm going to drop this whole mountain on you. If you take it literally that it's like God held the mountain over them, like, yes, we accept. Hasidic take on it, when we say that God held the mountain over them, we talk about those great godly revelations, an overwhelming love for the Jewish people, they couldn't say no. So when God does all these great miracles for them, started all the way back to the plagues in Egypt, and then all the splitting of the sea, and then everything. Now you're saying at Mount Sinai and all this stuff, hey, all of this is for you. You're like, what do you want me to do? How high? There is this discussion that because the Jewish people were kind of coerced, it wasn't necessarily their free will that they said it. This is an expounded interpretation because literal sense, God said, will you take the Torah? They said, yes, we will. And yay for the Jewish people. Looking at it further, the greater discussion is that they were kind of coerced into it. It's not a free choice when you're surrounded by all this. You're just totally overwhelmed by this great love and all these miracles and stuff. Yeah, you're going to say yes. You can't think clearly at that moment. So the rabbis talk about that in theory, a Jew could say this is not binding because it wasn't my free choice to accept it. We have 1,000 years or something from the giving of the Torah on Har Sinai until the time of Purim. However, at the time of Purim, the Jewish people willingly finished that acceptance that had started at Har Sinai. At the giving of the Torah, they were just so overwhelmed, so they said, yes, sure, we'll do it. But at the time of Purim specifically, the Kiblu HaYehudim, they fully accepted upon themselves. When it says what they had started to do, it means that they fully accepted upon themselves what was started at Mount Sinai. It became totally complete and binding at the time of Purim. That's according to the Gemara. Now we have questions. So this section is still looking at the way the Frierdiker Rebbe and the Maamar that he said. And then from there, once we get to the questions, that's the Rebbe asking questions on the previous Rebbe's Maamar. So we had a question of why were the Jewish people better able to accept the Torah in the time of Purim than at the giving of the Torah on Mount Sinai. At the time of Har Sinai, we had been raised up as a people then, and all the great miracles, just coming out of Egypt. Remember all the stuff that we did, all the Maamar we did with the iron crucible and all this kind of things. Why is Purim a time that all of a sudden they're more ready to complete the acceptance? What did Purim have that wasn't present at the time of the giving of the Torah on Har Sinai? What was going on at Purim that was different than the giving of the Torah? Not just that, at the giving of the Torah, the Jewish people were physically free. They'd finally been freed from slavery, and they had reached great spiritual heights. At the time of the giving of the Torah, the Jewish people in many ways were at the top of the world. Not only were we physically free, they went from this terrible, terrible slavery to absolute freedom with all these miracles, but we remember also we talked about all the great revelations that occurred at that time. So the Jewish people seemed to be at the top of their game at that moment. If anything, it seems like the giving of the Torah on Har Sinai should have been it. That's full acceptance. They are ready to take this on. This is from Shemot Rabbah. Anytime you see Rabbah, that means it's coming from the Medrash. That supplements a lot of the stories. Tells us a lot more about what was going on, because if not, we'd have the 50,000 books of Moses, basically. They say it's like allegorical, but it's not just that. So like here, the first word is whatever book it is, and then Rabbah is all the added stuff to it. So you're going to see Esther Rabbah, Bereshis Rabbah, Vayikra Rabbah, Salem Rabbah. It's all these things. These are all the added parts from what's originally there. Sometimes commentary story can be, there's a lot of stuff going on there. Baluchas Maseh Elokim Hema. The tablets are the work of God. And the writing was the writing of God engraved on the tablets. This is from the book of Shmos that it tells us this, that these are what the luchos were. The tablets are the work of God. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi said, each and every day a divine voice emerges from Mount Chorev. Mount Chorev is in Har Sinai, that's the reference to that, and proclaims woe unto the creations for their front to the Torah, as anyone who does not regularly engage in the Torah is ostracized from before the holy and blessed be he, as it is stated, the tablets were the work of God. One explanation about why the tablets are the work of God, the writing is the writing of God, etc. Another explanation, the word of Charas HaLuchos, that it says that it was engraved on the tablets. So it's talking about this is the writing. The writing was the writing of God, engraved on the tablets. Engraved on the tablets, this Hebrew word is charos. Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yirmeh, Rabbanan. Rabbi Yehuda says, do not read it as charos, but rather as cheros. Cheros meaning freedom. Freedom from the exiles. See the Hebrew word, remember in the Torah, there's no vowels. Sometimes we could find another explanation to the word by switching out the vowels. Same letter, same everything. We just don't pronounce it like this, pronounce it like this, and then we find additional meaning to the word. So we say, take this word of engraved, and don't just read it as engraved, read it as a word of freedom. Cheros. Rabbi Menachem says, freedom from the angel of death. The rabbis say, freedom from suffering. Rabbi Elazar, son of Rabbi Yosef Glili said, if the angel of death were to come and say before the Holy and blessed be he, you created me in this world for naught, he would say, I grant you dominion over every nation in the world except for this nation, to whom I granted freedom. That is charot on the tablet. So taking this now to show how the rabbis comment that when we talk about engraved on the tablets, we're talking about that we experienced freedom. So, giving of the Torah is connected to freedom. Here we have also a Reuven. A Reuven is a section of the Gemara. Rav Acha bar Yaakov Amar. Rav Acha bar Yaakov said, had the tablets not been broken, no nation or tongue would have ever ruled over them. It is stated, engraved, which again, this word of charus, do not read it engraved charus, but rather freedom cherus. Rav Acha bar Yaakov says, it's not just that the tablet, that the luchos are connected, the giving of the Torah is connected to freedom. It's that literally we would have always been freed from all other people if it hadn't come to this point where the tablets were broken. When Moshe had to break them, or they fell, that changed everything. More. This is from Tanya. If we would just do the Maamar in text, it would be much shorter. All these footnotes, they're just references. We don't see all the paragraphs in it. But we like to learn the Maamar the long way. Anyways, these two show us about physical freedom that they experience. You see, this is a reference to physical freedom. Also, we're talking about the great spiritual heights that were reached. So this is the section from Tanya that's going to tell us about the great spiritual heights that were reached then. So we're just substantiating this claim with sources. Oh, do you guys remember when we learned that? That Havaya is Elokim. Havaya is the name of infinity and Elokim is the name of nature. And you're going to see that Havaya is Elokim. From chapter 36. So, glimmer of this revelation, which will take place in the future, has already been experienced. At the time of the giving of the Torah at Sinai, as it is written, you have been shown to know that God is the Lord. Havaya is Elokim. There's nothing else besides him. Remember, there's nothing else besides him that we learned in the Micha Mocha Maamar. You actually revealed yourself, literally made yourself seen, indicating that the revelation was in a manner perceptible to physical sight. So it is written, and all the people saw the thunder. They saw what is normally heard, as the rabbis explained. They looked eastward and heard the divine speech issuing forth, saying, I am God your Lord. As in, the level of revelation was so great that even something like thunder, which you usually hear it, we actually saw it with our own eyes, which is speaking to the level of revelation. So we saw the truth of the world, that Havaya is the truth of the world, as in not nature, but infinite God is the truth of the world, to the extent that we saw it in all these physical aspects. And so too, turning toward the 4 points of the compass and above and below, they heard the words coming from every direction. There were a lot of miracles at the giving of the Torah, like there was no echo. There's a lot of things about the sound and sights and everything that seemed to define nature at that moment. Think about what's going on, and kind of, yeah, of course. But again, they experienced all these great revelations. As explained also in Tikkun Ezar, there was no place in which he did not speak to them. This is original surround sound. This was so because of the 10 Commandments, his blessed will was revealed, since they, the 10 Commandments, comprise the entire Torah, which represents the inner aspect of his will and wisdom, where there is no concealment of the countenance whatsoever. As we say in our prayers, from the light of your countenance, you gave us the Torah of life. The Torah thus represents the light of his countenance, i.e. the inner light of godliness. Nothing could obscure this light. When this light was revealed through the uttering of the 10 Commandments, the entire world experienced the revelation of godliness. Therefore, the Jews who stood at Sinai were nullified out of existence, as their sages have said. At every divine utterance, their soul took flight from their body. Remember we spoke about this. We wanted to hear the Torah directly from Hashem. Then Hashem says the first commandment, but also all the commandments at the same time. And everyone's like, and they're out. They're gone. Too much revelation for us. So God had to revive everybody. Said the second one, but also all at the same time, and boom, we're out. Okay, God had to revive everybody again. And we're like, okay, Moshe, new plan? How about God will say to you and then you say it to us? Let's try that one instead. But God restored it to them with the dew with which he will revive the dead in the world to come. This is the dew of Torah, which is called might, i.e. the Torah provides the strength that enables us to receive divine revelation without dissolving out of existence. As explained above in reference to the word of Tzaddikim in the world to come. Similarly, our sages remark, whoever engages in the study of the Torah, the dew of Torah will revive him. Dew is from a very high level, FYI. The Torah is variously described as dew, rain, and so on, each figure denoting a different level within it. For the statement just paraphrased, we learn that dew refers to the Torah's restorative power. It was this dew by which God restored the souls of the Jews, which had taken flight upon experiencing a degree of divine revelation, foreshadowing that of the Messianic era. I could have done a shorter version of that, but I'm like, hey, let's just do all of this. All this to say to substantiate the level of revelation that we experienced at that time. So again, what is it about Purim that allowed us to fully accept the Torah when we see what was happening at the time of the giving of the Torah? At the giving of the Torah, we were absolutely free. Nobody else ruled over us. We had come out of slavery and we were definitively God's people. Not only that, not only are we experiencing this physical freedom, but we also have great spiritual revelations which have not been seen since. So these two levels would seem to say that we were on such an elevated level. This is a time that you fully accept the Torah. Yet, and however, Purim seems the exact opposite of that. Hashem's presence is concealed during the exile. In exile in general, God's presence is concealed. We look around, where is he? We don't see him. And during Purim, the spiritual concealment was even more intense. Moreover, the Jewish people faced extreme physical danger at that time. So not only are we not free, but we have extreme physical danger, and God is not revealed at that time. Remember, part of the whole party that they were celebrating is, hey, the 70 years are up. The Jewish people are never going back. They're never going to rebuild the temple. They're never going to rebuild the base of Mikdash, and they're never going back. We've won this invisible God of theirs. That's part of it. There's so many dimensions, factors that are in there. There's so many other things aside from, we see the story in the Megillah. The Megillah is a very abridged version of the story of Purim. Even without even looking at the deep history of it, even without looking at the general historical context of it, or even the additional story of Purim, don't forget, in the whole Megillah, Hashem's name is not even mentioned. God is so concealed in nature, he's so played by the rules of nature per se, even though we know it's a great miracle, that God's not even mentioned there. And verses at the giving of the Torah, there were great godly revelations. It was so undeniable that God is it. Not only that, but we saw the truth of godliness. We didn't see the wrappings of godliness. We didn't say like, oh look, nature is a level of godliness. We saw truth of godliness, truth of God at that time. So Purim, it seems the exact opposite. How is this a time that now we shall culminate? Verses now to substantiate that. This is from Yeshaya, so the prophet Isaiah. Ki hinei choshech chasa eretz, for behold, darkness shall cover the earth. Using this as a reference now to the time of exile, which is a time of darkness, as in spiritual darkness. Chulin, this is a section of Gemara. Esther minatar minayin, vanochi haster aster. They also asked Rav Matana, so this is obviously part of a conversation, from where in the Torah can one find an allusion to the events involving Esther? Everything's from the Torah, so where does it talk about Esther in the Torah? He replied to them that the verse states, then my anger shall be kindled against them on that day, and I'll forsake them, and I will hide my face from them. And they shall be devoured, and many evils and troubles shall come upon them. This is from the book of Devarim, where it talks about if we don't do what God wants, then there's repercussions for that. If we turn away from him, God forbid, and you go chase after other things, there's repercussions for that. So that they will say in that day, have not these evils come upon us, because our God is not among us. And I will hide aster my face on that day for all the evil which they shall have wrought, and that they turn to other gods. So they asked this Rav Matana, they said, where is Esther in the Torah? And he references the verse from the book of Devarim. It says, Vanochi haster aster. I will surely hide my face on that day. And if you even look, you can see that it's the name of Esther is in that, because Esther means hidden. This verse that's being referenced, it's a language of hiding. It's a sense of saying that God's face will be hidden. So again, it goes to the point that Purim was a time of spiritual darkness. Exile and greater spiritual darkness of God hiding his face from us. This is the state that we were in. And here, from Megillah's Esther itself, ונשלח ספרם ביד הרצים על כל מידס המלך להשמיד להרוג לאבד את כל היהודים מנער ועד זקן טף ונשים ביום אחד 13 לחודש 12 חודש אדר שלוש. And letters shall be sent by the hand of the couriers to all the king's provinces to destroy, kill, and cause to perish all the Jews, both young and old, little children and women, on one day, on the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, and their spoils to be taken as plunder. This is when Haman's decree was going to go out. Ahasuerus ruled over the entire civilized world. 127 provinces, the world as we knew it, Ahasuerus ruled over it. All the Jewish people were under his domain. So when Haman decides that he's going to take out the Jewish people, young and old, women and children alike, he wanted all of us gone. Again, Purim seems the opposite of the giving of the Torah in that the extreme spiritual darkness and the extreme physical danger that we face. So here we have the verse is substantiating that. All considered, how is Purim the time to fully accept the Torah? What is it about Purim that brought about this complete acceptance of Torah? There's also something very special about it. Also, it talks about that from when Mashiach comes, we're not going to have the holidays anymore. There's kind of back and forth like what that means, because you can't just nullify the laws of the Torah, and there's laws about the holiday in the Torah. So one explanation is because in Messianic times, the divine light is going to be so great. Usually a holiday, there's greater divine light. It's a time of greater holiness. We are going to be at that level, basically. So yes, you're going to have the holidays, but you're not necessarily going to see the difference. Purim, there's something very distinct about Purim that we're always going to have Purim. There's something about the light, the spiritual aspect of Purim that's going to be forever, even on a greater level than other things. I think of Purim, we celebrate it now. It's kind of just like, hey, costumes, hamantash, etc. But there's a very deep, holy aspect to the holiday of Purim. Now here's something that's very important. During the decree, as in when Haman said that he wants to destroy the Jewish people, the decree wasn't only one day and then one day was gone. The whole story of Purim in general took place over several years, and this decree of Haman's was over many, many months. During that time, not one Jew considered abandoning his Judaism to save himself. Haman wants to destroy the Jewish people, so technically, if he's going after the Jew, all the Jew has to do is convert out. And then, ta-da, saved. And there's not one Jew who even considered doing that. So it's not only that, like, they didn't do it. They didn't even consider doing that. Despite what they faced, that Haman wanted to wipe everybody out. Not only that, additionally, the Jewish people actively risked gathering to study Torah in public. So it's not only that I won't abandon Judaism. They actively were, let's get together and publicly study Torah. And this is what makes us who we are. We will publicly study Torah. Which, remember what the context of this original Maamar was, that the previous Rebbe said in 1927, when he knew that there were agents at his Purim for praying and watching him and listening to what he was going to say. And this is what he's telling them. Publicly risking ourselves for Torah. This is what the Frierdiker Rebbe is talking about. And again, a couple weeks later he was arrested. They were going to execute him for treason. Quote unquote treason. At Purim, so during the time of Purim, the Jewish people fulfilled Torah mitzvahs with Mesiras Nefesh, which is self-sacrifice. That they actively risked knowing that this could be to their own physical end, and yet they did it anyways. That's what we mean by Mesiras Nefesh, the self-sacrifice. According to the Frierdiker Rebbe, what's one thing that Purim had was this active self-sacrifice for Torah. This is buffered, substantiated by Tanya. We learned this in Tanya in chapter 18. Remember when we spoke about the hidden love that every Jew has? That it's part of our DNA and it's deep within us, and often we don't necessarily know that it's there. It's always there. It's a pilot light that can never go out, but unless we know how to tap into it, it can get covered over. Not put out, never extinguished, God forbid, but it just gets covered over and gets hard to tap into. But there are times, a crisis moment, that it could flare up. A good example of that is Daniel Pearl, the journalist who they decapitated decapitated him a while ago. He did not seem to actively be leading a Jewish lifestyle, and yet his final words were, "I'm a Jew." We would say, where's that coming from? It's coming from that pilot light that's going to flare up now. It's actually interesting. It's a different Maamar. The Rebbe talks about how people who lived in Russia during communism, they risked themselves for Judaism. Genuinely, truly risked themselves for Judaism. But once they get to a place like America or something, where the threat is not there anymore, they kind of fall back into old patterns. It's a similar idea, because when they're in Russia and they're under threat, this part of them flares up. There will never be anything that disconnects me. But once they're not under threat anymore, the flare kind of simmers back down again. So here we have Tanya. Therefore, as a rule, even the lowest of the low, they actually translate kal shebakalim. Kal is like light, so like the worthless of the worthless. I modified the translation. The lowest of the low and the sinners among Israel sacrifice their lives for the sanctity of God's name and suffer harsh torture rather than deny God's unity, even if they're bores and illiterates who are ignorant of God's greatness. The Alter Rebbe is talking about it here, that even someone who doesn't have deep intellectual appreciation for God, does it surprise you when you say, oh, Rabbi Akiva sacrificed himself? Well, Rabbi Akiva understands, he knows. But the Alter Rebbe says, like any Jew, even the one who knows nothing, will still sacrifice himself for Judaism and for God. Even the little knowledge they possess does not motivate them, for they do not delve into it at all, so by no means does their self-sacrifice result from any knowledge or contemplation of God. The whole thing of this pilot light is that, first of all, self-sacrifice in general doesn't make sense. But specifically, you should live, not die. But it's not just that. It's even someone who has no understanding and appreciation for God and what they're giving their life for. Even they will display self-sacrifice. Rather, they're prepared to sacrifice their lives without any knowledge or reflection, but as though it were absolutely impossible to renounce the one God without any reason or rational argument whatsoever. Why are you giving up your life for God? Because there's no deep intellectual argument about it. It's just, this is how it goes. Were their readiness to face martyrdom intellectually motivated, the benefits and costs of the act would first be carefully weighed. So you can say, oh, Rabbi Akiva, he's a great leader. This act of martyrdom will inspire generations, and we'll talk about it for all time to come. And also giving your life up for God, what a great thing it is, etc., etc. Rabbi Akiva could explain it to us for hours on end. Whether or not he would, as far as to give us that level of understanding, but we could say Rabbi Akiva understood it. And he did. If you remember, his ending was that he was burned on a Torah scroll. So thanks, Romans. But the decision of self-sacrifice is not based on such rational arguments, stemming instead from a non-intellectual resolve that is simply impossible to do otherwise, as we just said. Purim was a time that every Jew was at risk. Some people make distinctions that it was only the religious Jews that Haman went after, but at that point he wanted to just destroy them totally. But the general terms, in theory, a Jew could have converted out to save themselves. But they didn't. They're a Jew and remain a Jew. And not just that they were public about their Torah study. Not only did they not try to save themselves, but they actively displayed who they were, I guess you could say. This is substantiated with this whole idea that any level of practice, any level of a Jewish person, as far as any intellectual level or practice level, religious level that they're on, they will display absolute Mesiras Nefesh. This is going to flare up. This is going to come up at a time of spiritual crisis. Substantiating the idea that no one saved themselves by trying to convert. It didn't even enter their mind. Go, just deny God and then you'll be saved. No, I will never do that. And it doesn't have to make sense. I'm just never going to do that. So what is there something distinctive about the time of Purim? There was a certain level of Mesiras Nefesh, of self-sacrifice that was displayed that was not present at the giving of the Torah. Not just that, but this level that we are able to achieve, this is facilitated by Mordechai, who is the Moshe Rabbeinu of that generation. So Mordechai awakened this Mesiras Nefesh of the Moshe Rabbeinu of his generation. This is how Mordechai is introduced in the Megillah. Ish Yehudi haya b'shushan abira, Ushma Mordechai ben Yair ben Shimi ben Kish Ish Yemini. Ish Yehudi, this is, we first became Yehudim. So here's translated as Judean man, but there was a man, a Yehudi man, in Shushan, the capital, whose name was Mordechai, the son of Yair, the son of Shimi, the son of Kish, a Benjamite. Ish Yemini, which theoretically means a man of the right hand, because Benjamin, Benyamin, son of my right hand, Ish Yemini, he was from the tribe of Benjamin. That's Mordechai was from. Here, remember how I said about the Rabbah? So you see Esther Rabbah. This is on the Megillah, and Rabbah is all the filling in of it. Ish Yehudi haya b'Shushan abira comments on this verse. There's a Judean man in Shushan, the capital. There was a Yehudi man in Shushan, the capital. Ish teaches that Mordechai in his generation was the equivalent of Moshe in his generation. As it is written about him, and the man, Va'ish Moshe, was very humble. It's correlating these two words about Ish that he uses to describe them both. So, what are we getting at so far? So far we're learning the Jewish people accepted upon themselves what they had started to do. You say, oh yes, when Mordechai said we're going to make Purim a holiday, they all accepted that. Basic level of interpretation. But we're going to go deeper from there. What did they accept? What had they started? They had started to accept the Torah at Har Sinai, and it was only finished in the time of Purim. Why? Because at Har Sinai, God held the mountain over them, or this great display of revelation. And so it seemed like they were coerced into accepting the Torah, because you can't say no at a moment like that. Either because God's threatening to drop the mountain, or because there's just too much love at that time. So in theory, a person could have said, I'm not bound to the Torah because I didn't willingly accept it. But at the time of Purim, they did willingly accept it. We have a question of what's distinct about Purim. Specifically because at the time of the giving of the Torah, the Jewish people are at the greatest heights. They have great physical freedom and they have great spiritual heights that they reach. So this seems like the proper format for accepting the Torah. And we saw all the proof of that. Purim seems to be the absolute opposite. They're in exile, which is a time of darkness. Purim, which is an added darkness. And not just that, they're in a time of great physical danger. So it doesn't seem like the time to be accepting the Torah. Torah. It's not the right setting for it. The optics are not right for this time. And yet, it was a time. There was something distinct about Purim. What's something distinct about Purim? There was a level of self-sacrifice displayed that not only did no Jew try to save themselves by trying to convert out, God forbid, or anything like that, even just like, oh, just for showsies, we'll just say it, just to save our skin. Not just that, but they actively risked studying Torah in public. And this gets to the level where it doesn't necessarily have to make sense, but a Jew will sacrifice himself for God. This kind of level that was brought out of Purim is brought out, facilitated through Mordechai, who was the Moshe Rabbeinu of his generation.